come with me to that first Christmas story. Joseph and Mary at the center of the story in Nazareth on the eastern frontiers of the Roman Empire, far away from the places of power and influence like Athens and Alexandria and Rome. Nazareth was an obscure and an out-of-the-way place. Did they know each other? Well, perhaps they had seen one another at the synagogue or in the marketplace of Nazareth. Perhaps Joseph had heard her laugh or her voice or seen her hair or the way she walked. But the reality is that in those times and places, it was the parents who usually arranged the marriage. There was a bride price to pay. It was determined by a number of economic factors and things like birth order and number of siblings in the family. Once it was all arranged, a contract was then written, and it was called a betrothal or an engagement, but in our legal terms, equivalent to marriage. They wouldn't much see each other or get to know one another up until the actual wedding, and if they were together, it was probably with chaperones that were in place. But that doesn't mean they didn't dream and imagine and wonder what it would be like, how they would get to know one another and establish a home and perhaps someday have children. We don't know much about that piece of their lives, but we do know that Joseph and Mary were truly good people, and that this was a match made in heaven. God was involved in bringing them together. And then this happy dream, this hopeful future, it was all dashed on that day when Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant and it wasn't him. And so he went to bed alone and must have agonized about what to do. He loved Mary, or he hated her. She said that she was pregnant and still a virgin. How gullible did she think that he was? And there was a law for a situation like this. The law was that she was to be publicly condemned and brought out in front of the village people who would have rocks to throw, and she would be stoned to death for committing sexual sin. He couldn't do that. He loved her. So maybe he should just marry her anyway and assume that this would be his child and let everybody think that. Why not? But then if she cheated on him before they were even married, what were the chances that she would be faithful to him once they were married to one another? So he came to a conclusion the best deal was to divorce her. Go through the legal process, call this thing off. The pregnancy, that's her problem, not his problem. Let her deal with it. And he's going to go on with life and find somebody else to marry. But that night, just to get to sleep, just for some rest, to stop thinking about all this, to stop processing it, just try to get some sleep. And so I see him tossing and turning, and finally he falls asleep. An uneasy and an anxious sleep that turns into a dream. There are those that say that dreams are really helpful to us. They are a way that help us process the issues of life. Sometimes they can sort of integrate and settle. There are pieces of it that we remember, and much of it we soon forget. But dreams can also be bizarre. They can be frightening. And what started out as some sort of attempted integration of the realities of life turned into a terrible nightmare, and the anxiety increases. So Joseph dreamed, and it was a most unusual dream. It actually changed his life. According to Matthew chapter 1, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in this dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Okay, imagine that's your dream. I mean, you're in these stressful circumstances, and now you have a dream like that. It's kind of a far-fetched fantasy. I mean, do you really think an angel from God came and told you this stuff? What are the chances that you really take anything here seriously? How does that make you decide much of anything about what you're supposed to do the next morning or the next day? But this unnamed angel, who knew Joseph's name, at least in the dream, went right to his heart and says in just a few words, "Don't be afraid." Because he was afraid. I mean, that was the exact issue. This wasn't some process. This was direct hit on where he was and what he was up against. The angel went right to the center of it all because he was afraid. Some may call it anxiety or fear. Technically, there's a difference in the use of the words. Fear is something that is imminent, something that is present and real and powerful. And we've got to decide between fight and flight up against the fears that we face. Anxiety more internal than external. Anxiety more a wondering and a projection about what's going to happen. I think they were conflated with Joseph. He had genuine fear because these were real issues, but anxiety as well. How's he going to deal with this? Who's he going to talk to? How does he process this thing through? And we understand this. Of course we do. Because we have our fears, real threats, things that we get in the mail, a conversation that we have, an issue at work, an email. And this is real. We're going to lose a job, or we're going to have a health crisis, or a family member is going through something that we never could have imagined ever would come to our family. So we understand what he felt. Not that his problems are our problems, or our problems his problems, but his problems were real, both in the immediate and his projections of where this was all going to go. He was afraid. He was afraid to marry Mary. He was afraid to commit to a woman who apparently loved another man, assuming that she was impregnated by somebody else. He was afraid. Of course he was afraid to claim a child that he knew nothing about and would not be his. And he was probably afraid of a woman that he was concerned was having psychotic delusions, that God was telling her that God had impregnated her through the Holy Spirit. What is she thinking? And do you want to marry somebody who is going to have these types of delusions? So the angel says, "Don't be afraid." Like those 3 words are really going to make all of this go away. So I don't know what your anxieties and fears are. You do. We all do. And in a dream, or we imagine an angel saying, "Okay, here's the deal. Just don't be afraid." It just doesn't seem like quite enough. So finally, Joseph gets to sleep, and I wonder how he'll wake up. Will it be as stressful and as painful and as frightening as the moments before he finally fell to slumber, maybe early that same morning? Actually, every indication is that Joseph, who was so frightened and anxious, awakened with peace, with certainty, with a realization that he had actually experienced a supernatural encounter. Back to the historian Matthew, who tells us that when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife, but he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. So it actually worked. This actually worked. This guy, frightened by what the future would bring, now has peace. And you try to figure out, okay, how did that actually happen? Well, he took the angel seriously. Assumed that the angel spoke to him, to be sure, but not for the angel himself, but for God. This is actually God's spokesperson that's talking to him. And that the angel offered more than just words of comfort, but actually specific action. something that he's supposed to do. Don't be afraid. Take Mary as your wife. And in that immediate context, this angel makes supernatural sense out of things that up until that point were just nonsense. That somehow this angel brought together everything that would help him understand how, well, not all the details of it, but how to live within the context of all this pregnancy and that this child was going to save the world from sin and fear. So the angel had his message believed by Joseph. And he did it. Joseph actually did it. In a step of astonishing faith, he did what the angel commanded. And then you know exactly what happened. Joseph and Mary got married, that she gave birth to a child, that he would grow to maturity, that he would die on the cross, that he would pay for human sin, that he would rise from the dead, that billions of people now and before now have come to faith in him, have claimed him, call themselves Christians, Jesus Christians, and their lives have been changed and transformed. Salvation from sin, but also a life of faith that chases fears away, all because of Jesus. So, what are you scared of? What's the anxiety, the worries, the fears? Yeah, the message is the same. It echoes down through the centuries. The words that the angel spoke to Joseph, we hear them now, and we take them as words from God. Simple words. Don't be afraid. That even though we may not fully understand that God can make sense out of things that to us are nothing but nonsense, that Jesus Christ truly is what he is called, and that is the Prince of Peace. That in the most terrifying of circumstances, he is there and able to supernaturally transform. And is all this then wishful thinking? Is this just some sort of religious make-believe? It's not. It really isn't. So try it and see. See Jesus. See the difference that he makes. Have confidence that God is able to take the most frightening aspects of life and make his sense out of them even when we do not fully understand, and to give to us the peace and confidence that he gave to Joseph. Will Jimeno was a 33-year-old rookie police officer, the Port Authority of New York. It was September 11th, 2001. He was outside, and a dark, large shadow passed over him, which he quickly realized was a low-flying airplane that crashed into Tower Number 1 of the World Trade Center. Along with 20 other police officers, they commandeered a bus, and as other people ran away from the crash scene, they drove to it. They went inside, and then Tower 1 collapsed, entombing them in debris and all of the frightening aspects of it. It was terrifying beyond description. Aside him was another police officer, Sergeant John McLaughlin. They were deep underground, and as if that's not terrifying enough, there were natural gas lines, and they broke and they caught fire. And so in the midst of the dust, where they could hardly see or breathe, where they couldn't move or get out, fireballs are going past them. And then that heated up the bullets and the revolvers of other police officers that had either fallen or their weapons had been laid aside. And suddenly 9mm bullets, they counted 15 of them, went ricocheting around them. Officer Jimeno's wife was 7 months pregnant, and he wanted to get a message to her before he died. Except his radio didn't work. And so he asked Sergeant McLaughlin to try his radio and to speak into it a message on his behalf. Not that there was an expectation that anyone would immediately listen or reply, but somehow the hope that there would be an automated recording device somewhere, and it would be recorded, and at least someday, somehow, it would be relayed to his wife. So McLaughlin tried. He spoke into the radio and said, "Officer Jimeno requests that his baby girl be named Olivia." You see, Will Jimeno's wife wanted to name their daughter Olivia, and he was unsure and hadn't consented to it. But now, expecting that in a short time he would die, he wanted to think about his unborn daughter, and he wanted to think about her by name. So he agreed there, and the message was sent that Olivia would be her name. Jimeno said, "We had been crushed, burnt, and shot at. I was exhausted. I had done everything as a police officer that I could do and everything as a human being. I was at that point where I just knew I was going to die. I'm not sure what happened," he said. "I may have passed out. Anyway, I had a vision. I looked up and I saw Jesus coming toward me. He had long brown hair and was wearing a white robe that glowed. Behind Jesus was a field of tall grass blowing in the wind. Over his left shoulder was a beautiful lake with trees around it. And in his hand was a bottle of clear, cold water. And I remember thinking, look at that. I've got water coming. I'm going to get a drink." And then I woke up, and I felt energized. And I said, "Sarge, we're going to make it. We're going to make it out of this place." And it was several hours later that U.S. Marines and New York Police Department officers rescued these men. The frightening moment, the vision of Jesus, the remedy he could never have imagined. I asked before, I think, what your anxieties and fears are, what it is that makes it difficult to go to sleep at night. What are the worries about today and tomorrow? So what do you do? What do you do especially when they sometimes seem to be exaggerated at Christmas time? Close your eyes and listen to the words of the angel that are really the words of God. Don't be afraid. Not that everything will be explained or every question will be answered, but there is a supernatural reality and understanding that we have a God who is committed to turn nightmares into dreams, that he sent his son, Jesus. We believe in Jesus, who came to take away not only the sins, but the fears of our world.